Welcome to the Everybody Matters podcast, a show dedicated to the idea that when organizations care enough to show their people that who they are and what they do matter, they unlock the only business idea with truly unlimited potential. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. Don't forget to connect with us on the web at barry-wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. Sara is one of the partners of the BW Leadership Institute, the arm of Barry-Wehmiller created to share with other organizations what we have learned about building and fostering a people-centric culture. Through the BW Leadership Institute, like-minded organizations can now partner with us to undertake the critical steps to implement their own culture change, learning better listening and communication skills, developing leaders, establishing a vision, creating an environment of continuous improvement, and so much more. Many of these initiatives were originally part of Barry-Wehmiller University, our internal university established to help our people become better leaders. And Sara was one of the primary architects of the curriculum. Recently, Sara spoke to students at the University of Missouri St. Louis about her leadership journey and about the choice of leadership.
This is Joseph Campbell, who was an author that I read about in AP English. He is the person who invented the hero's journey archetype. And so any movie that you watch that has a hero in it, any book that you've read, is probably based around the work of this guy. One of his collaborators was George Lucas. And the reason Star Wars is as successful as it is partly due to Joseph Campbell. And he talks about that in the hero's journey, you're going along in life, and they tend to be people who are called to do something. And then they fall in a dark hole, and you think about Luke Skywalker, and he's down there, and he's having his moment in the dark hole, and then they rise out of it. That's kind of the classic archetype. And you think about, from the perspective of the choice that you all, if you're sitting here as a student, that you have to go out into the world. And my advice to you all, as you make this choice, is to think more about the why, whatever that is for you, more about the who, in terms of who you're going to work for, than the what's. But when you think about this choice that you have as you leave this institution of higher learning, I would urge you to think more about the why and understanding that the person that you are going to work with in terms of your leader is going to have a dramatic impact on your life, the who. The what isn't as important. I never graduated from business school thinking that I would end up working for a manufacturing company. And if it wasn't for a series of experiences and really following what I believed is my why and the contribution I think I can have in this world, I wouldn't have ended up where I am today. So when Dean Hoffman asked if I would do this, he asked me to talk about my personal leadership journey. And that's a little bit harder than telling the story of Barry-Wehmiller and the business that I'm a part of. And I really started thinking about the opportunities I had when I grew up, as Dean Hoffman mentioned, in Fairbanks. And I thought to some of the unique experiences that I had that my parents gave me. And the first that I thought of was when I was 5 years old, and my parents took us on our first backpacking trip. So that's me and my dad. And I had a little red external frame backpack, and I had to carry my sleeping bag, my clothes, and my snacks. This was what they asked of us. And so we went to a place called Sheep Creek. It's just around the Denali National Park area in the state of Alaska. We drove that morning, and we started hiking. And we hiked in along a dry riverbed. So a lot of gravel, a lot of large rocks that you had to climb over. And we get to the end of the riverbed, and we reach a large mountain going up. And my dad looked at me as the youngest member of the family with the shortest legs. And he sat me down, and he said, here's the choice. We can go up tonight, practically 24 hours of daylight, no problem. We can go up tonight, or we can camp here. It's your choice. What do you want to do? And one of my earliest childhood memories was tears streaming down my face, looking at my dad saying, I think I can do it. I think I can climb up the mountain tonight. Reflecting back on that experience, what I realized is that my parents were very well versed in the science of intrinsic motivation, right? She has to choose it, or we are never getting up this mountain tonight. They were also very adept at a well-placed bribe. So about 10 fun-sized Snickers bars later, we did, in fact, reach the top of the mountain. And so this is one of my absolute favorite photos of my dad and I at the top of that mountain at the end of that trip. So why did I share that story with you? Leadership is a choice. And so often in business, we don't look at it as allowing people to have the freedom to choose. And much of what we learn in high school, college, in our schooling is a lot more about personal achievement than it is about giving other people the choice to do what they would like to achieve. So then we go to high school. This is my AP English teacher. Isn't she classic? I did not go to high school in the 70s, but she kept the look, which is great. So her name was Susan Stithum, and she was one of the best teachers that I ever had. And she told us at the beginning of the school year, my stated goal is to leave you with more questions than when you started. And she believed that through literature and through storytelling, the human race could wrestle with the ontological dilemma. Why are we here, and what is it all about? And so at the end of my senior year, I went up to Miss Stithum and I said, I got into Washington University in St. Louis, as Dean Hoffman would like to tell me, a lesser institution than UMSL. I'm going to go to St. Louis and I'm going to study business. And she looked right back at me and said, well, I don't understand how you're going to solve the ontological dilemma if you do that. But I did to St. Louis. I'm going to skip over my college years and the first job that I had working for my alma mater and start with my first week on the job at Barry-Wehmiller. I had taken a job to be an analyst for a manufacturing company. And I was sitting at my desk, and my leader came over to my desk, and she said, you're going to meet Bob Chapman next week. Be forewarned, he's probably going to ask you, how do you define success in your life, and what does that have to do with working here? He is a real hoot at cocktail parties. I can say that because he's in the audience tonight. So I had two thoughts, the first of which was, I have a week to figure that out. And the second was, Ms. Stithum, maybe you were wrong, that maybe business could have a soul after all. So to understand a little bit more from where I come from, I'm going to give you kind of the briefest of backgrounds in terms of Barry-Wehmiller. When you start talking about purpose and meaning, you start thinking about maybe you work for a nonprofit company, maybe you work for a really cool tech company. There must be ping pong tables and brightly colored walls, and certainly there's a beer fridge somewhere, right? If we're going to talk about beer, we're going to talk about meaning. And we're just the opposite. We make really big machinery that makes stuff. So if you think about the products that you buy in the grocery store, likely bottled, capped, labeled, conveyed, case-packed on a piece of our machinery. We have locations around the world. We're about 2.4 billion. We're a unique blend of 80 different companies that we have acquired since 1987. What that means is that we've gotten really good at thinking about culture and the ways that it can be sustainable, transferable, replicable in places where you would least likely expect. And we have done this while producing 18% growth in revenue over that same time period. Now, the reason to talk about the success, the financial success of the company is for two purposes. One, if we were a failing business, you all probably wouldn't care. And secondly, that we have a unique take on the balance between people and performance. That in fact, it is not a balance. Balance implies somewhat of a tension. One's up, one's down, in a constant fight. And we think of it as a virtuous cycle. That the reason to do well in business is so that you provide a future for the people that are in your span of care. And if you take care of people, they provide the engine with which to grow your business. And that is a critical part of the Barry-Wehmiller story. We're also motivated by this fact that we know, according to Gallup, that the number one determinant of happiness is a good job. More than health, more than wealth, more than a good spouse, though that is highly encouraged. That the time that we spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week in our chosen profession will determine our level of happiness. What this means is that business has a tremendous opportunity to affect lives in a positive way. As leaders in business, we turn people back to their families, either fulfilled by their experience with us or defeated. It's positive or it's negative, it's not neutral. And if we can tap into this power, we can actually make the world a better place. So how do we think? This is our core message. It is essentially out of our book called Everybody Matters that came out this past fall. And it's certainly my greatest lessons as a leader within Barry-Wehmiller. And the first point of which is that everybody wants to do better, trust them. You hear very often in business that trust has to be earned. We think the opposite. We think that trust is really a generative act. If you give it, you'll get it back. And we're gonna come back to this one. That leaders are everywhere, find them. It can be taught, it can be a choice. So often we will acquire companies, we won't replace the people, we will turn over a set of cultural tools, and those same people will rise up and turn that business around. Leaders are everywhere, you just have to know where to look. The people achieve good things, big and small, every day, celebrate them. Recognition and celebration in business is your absolute most abundant resource because you can give it all day long, every day. And you think about that we get a little conditioned to recognize and celebrate achievements. And if you apply that to a child riding their bike and you say to that child, you know, when you get her all the way around the block, then I will celebrate you. But we skip over the effort to the achievement. We skip over saying, hey, good job, you put your helmet on. Good job, you looked both ways as you were crossing the street. And so as business leaders, we're really called to look for those small things and shine a light across the organization and find those small things that we can recognize and celebrate. Some people wish things were different. Listen to them. Listening is one of the greatest acts of leadership that you can do, and we're going to come back to that one as well. And everybody matters. Show them. So I want to tell you guys 3 stories that pertain to this list of lessons that I certainly have learned and are at the very core of how Barry-Wehmiller thinks and operates its business. The first has to do with a major hotel chain. So Dean Hoffman mentioned that we're starting to work with outside organizations. And so over the past year, we've gotten to know this hotel chain. You've no doubt stayed in one of their properties. And so they decided to do a little experiment on trust. And they gathered up all of their housekeepers in their Naperville, Illinois location, and they told them, you know what, you guys know what you need to do. Your job is to clean 36 rooms. You can do that by coming in whenever you want and setting your own schedule. Let's try it out. We trust you. You're gonna get your job done. 2 things happened. 1, the housekeepers started coming in earlier. And the second thing was that the score on their employee or their survey of customers on cleanliness started to come back higher. So they started to dig into what was going on. Number 1, the housekeepers, a lot of whom were moms, it was more important to them to get out early so that they could go to soccer games, pick their kids up from school, what have you, be home for their families. And so they started coming in early and getting their jobs done. The second thing is they were afraid it was going to be taken away, and they started working even harder. So little ways into this experiment, the first housekeeper showed up late. And the team supervisor said, we're getting everybody together, and we're going to find out why they decided to come in late. So they brought them all together, and they said, Janice, you came in late. You know, tell us, why did you decide to do that? And she said, for the last 10 years, I haven't been able to go to church with my family. And since you changed this rule, I was able to do just that. So in the category of everybody wants to do better, trust them. Trust is a generative act. When you give it, it allows people to respond to it. And that's at the foundation of everything that we believe. Leaders are everywhere. Find them. The gentleman there, his name is Jimmy. He works in our Baltimore plant. And so not that long ago, Jimmy's job was to run a machine tool that we call a lathe, which essentially takes a really long piece of metal and cuts it into a smaller piece of metal. And if you had walked into that plant, you would have found Jimmy leaned up against his machine, literally sleeping while the lathe ran. And so you look at Jimmy and you think, gosh, non-contributor, troublemaker, what's up with Jimmy? Does he need to sleep more at night, right? And so you start thinking kind of all of these thoughts. We used to route tour groups literally around Jimmy, right? Don't bring him near Jimmy. It's not good. And so finally, we started asking Jimmy some different questions. And the first question that we asked him was, hey, Jimmy, what's the most frustrating part of your job? And he says, well, I'll tell you, that's easy. The runtime on my machine tool is 40 minutes. I was told once upon a time by a supervisor, you can't leave the machine tool. Do you know what it feels like to have a job where I put a piece of metal into this machine tool and I literally have to watch it run all day long? Imagine if your job was to watch your washing machine run. That's what I was told to do. So that's what I'm doing. So you go, okay, I'm starting to think a little bit differently about Jimmy. So hey, Jimmy, how would you improve the work that you do? He said, well, that's easy too. I'd bring the raw materials I need to feed the lathe over here so I could be working these materials, and I'd bring the finishing equipment over here so when the piece came out, I could actually do more work. Great idea. Created a U-shaped cell of his own design. The byproduct for the business is that Jimmy is wildly more efficient. But the different take within Barry-Wehmiller is focusing on the fact that we owe it to Jimmy to create a better job for him, right? It's not okay in business to give people work that is essentially mindless. We've trapped you into a broken process, into a broken system, and you literally have no choice but to fall asleep on your machine tool. And so continuously improving the situations that we find people in is really critical. So this is Jimmy shaking the hand of Martin O'Malley. He was once a presidential contender. He was the then governor of Maryland. Leaders are everywhere, find them. And sometimes they're in the absolute least likely of places. The most frustrated people sometimes look like the most apathetic people. And everybody matters, show them. For this story, a bit of background in terms of what my actual job is. So about 9 years ago, I had the opportunity to work with our team to create Barry-Wehmiller University. And the thought process behind creating a corporate university really was, if we want the culture that we believe in to be sustainable and replicable over time, we actually have to teach the behaviors that we believe in. We can't really leave it to chance that the current leadership that exists today is magically going to reappear a generation from now. And so how do we actually create a leadership school to teach our people how to be great leaders in the future? And so we decided a few things when we created the university. The first of which is, if leadership is a choice, then mandatory leadership training doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so we decided to have people apply to attend classes within the university, not based on senior leadership status, not based on title, based on the honor to attend. We also decided that we wanted to create an opportunity for our own people to teach their peers. And so we thought, we'll teach our people how to teach. And so in that journey, we created a professor training experience to take people like Jimmy, leaders in our organization, and actually teach them how to teach some of our curriculum. One of the classes that we wrote early on really revolves around the concept I mentioned of listening. And the fact of the matter is you think, I'm a pretty good listener, right? I got that feedback maybe from a professor, perhaps in a performance review. I've gotten feedback that I'm a great listener. And the reality of us, most of us are terrible. And of all of the skills that we have taught our people, listening tends to be the most profound. And so we have a 3-day class called Listen Like a Leader. It's been so popular, in fact, that a lot of outside organizations and companies have asked us if they could take it on and teach it in their companies. And so in that process, we've trained literally hundreds of people around the world to teach this class. And a few weeks ago, I met a woman named Tammy, who came from a company called Webasto. Webasto, you've never heard of them, but they probably made the sunroof in your car. That's what they do. And so Tammy comes to professor training, and one of the things that we teach people is how to tell really good stories, because that is the number one way that you can inspire people and really create significant behavior change. And so we teach a class on storytelling, and then the students actually stand up and start to tell their stories. And so Tammy stands up, and if you were to look at Tammy, you would think, pulled together, she has a beautiful family, she was an excellent facilitator, and she starts telling her personal history. And I asked her for her permission to tell just a little bit of it. When Tammy was 23 years old, she was living with her then husband and her small child, going to art school. That's one of Tammy's paintings. She's an incredibly talented artist. And she starts talking about the fact that her husband's business was failing, and they had to move back in with her parents. In that process, she actually discovers that the reason that his business was failing was because he was addicted to heroin. And it's not necessarily important to go into all of the specific details of Tammy's story, but if you're imagining all the terrible things, that's what happened to Tammy. She ends up as a single mom. She lost her husband. She ends up as a single mom working for an automotive company, this brilliant artist who had to give up on her dream of art school to take care of these precious children of hers. And at the end of professor training, this is what she said, is that she'd worked in healthcare and she'd worked in education. And who would have thought that she would have to come to the automotive industry to have a chance to teach people how to listen? So maybe business has a soul after all. I think about Tammy, and I think about the question that Bob asked me, which I haven't answered for you all yet, in terms of how I define success in my life. And it's really this, and this is personal to me. And it's personal to that idea of choice, that being there for people in that moment of choice so that they can achieve more than they thought possible. For Tammy, it was that opportunity to teach, is where I find my inspiration and why I do what I do every day.
If you'd like to find out more about the BW Leadership Institute, their services and offerings, go to bwleadershipinstitute.com. You can read more about Sara and Barry-Wehmiller University in Bob Chapman and Ross Zodia's book, Everybody Matters: The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family. And to find out more about the book, go to everybodymattersbook.com. For updates on the book, this podcast, and lots of additional great content and insight, don't forget to connect with us on the web at barry-wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening. And don't forget, Everybody Matters is the only business idea with truly unlimited potential.